So, Mami Onami,
That's me.
thank you for joining on this fine Thursday morning. This is the first one of these I've done in the middle of the day, by the way. I usually do them at night. So, thank you for breaking that habit and proving to me that I don't have to be a skulking hermit in order to talk to people.
I get it.
I think that probably several people will have known of you. My wife follows you on TikTok as well as myself. But for those who are not familiar with your journey, maybe you could give like the, standard 3-minute bio of how you came to be someone who's operating as a teacher in this, we'll call it mystical space.
Yeah, of course. I definitely got into it kicking and screaming. It was not this like, and now I'm going to teach. Like it was like, I was really kind of pressed into it. I was extremely resistant to God because I grew up in a doomsday sex cult called the Children of God. And it was just like multi-level abuse. So doomsday, meaning, the whole us versus them, the world's ending. We have to be spiritually prepared. You're not spiritually prepared. And then this sex aspect where there was pedophilia deeply embedded in the culture, very like widely encouraged. When they got in trouble for that, they were like, oh, okay, we're not doing that anymore. But they didn't clean it out of the culture. So it was still like very much in there. And then as I was growing up, they started this new thing called like Loving Jesus, where it was these long, sessions where people would be talking about how they were having sex with Jesus. And so once you start like fucking the deity, things can get kind of complicated. And so it's like interesting, not bad. It's not strange, but certainly interesting that, as I'm moving more into teaching about sacred sexuality, and it's like all of the things that I was really resistant to as a child. And that I was just like, I'm going to lock this up and throw away the key. That was how I dealt with God for a long time. And that was how I dealt with sex for a long time. But on the topic of God, I escaped via a suicide attempt when I was 13. It was the only way that I could get out before I was 18. And I just drugs, alcohol, and work, this combination of drugs, alcohol, and work. Oh, and eating disorders. I used that to keep myself so mentally occupied that I could not think about why things were the way that they were. I was just super angry, super fucked up, and rightly so. But I pretty safely ignored, I wouldn't look at the ocean. I wouldn't look at God. I wouldn't look at stars. I wouldn't look at anything that inspired some kind of like quantum thought. Cause I was like, like if I do this, the next stop will be joining a cult like my parents did. And so that came to a grinding halt when I was 27 years old. I had a dream that my fiance was my best friend of 10 years. I was like, us getting together is going to be the point that my life turned around. Yay, now things are going to start getting good. And then I had a dream that he died from a heroin overdose. And 24 hours later, I came home to find him dead the exact same way. And I had never had a dream before. I'd never had any kind of quantum or paranormal experience before. And I came home from work to find him dead the exact way. And I had heeded the dream. I made a point of really saying goodbye. I was very shaken by it, made a point of having a wonderful last day with him. But when I came home, he was dead the exact way that I saw it happen. And I resuscitated. The EMTs couldn't find my house. And so I was on the phone with the EMTs resuscitating him for 22 minutes. Jesus. And the whole time I was watching myself from the top of the room. It was like I was there, but I was not there. And when the EMTs came in and told me that he had been dead for 4 hours, I was in literally two places at once. I was in a complete state of shock on earth, but I had this huge sense of gratitude and understanding that it had to happen like this. And I didn't understand why, because it should have been the icing on the cake of me like, there is no God. And it ended up being the awakening for me that like there was God. So my journey of being a teacher was like integrating that, because it created a lot of problems for me. Like, it created a lot of problems for me. I quit my job. I maxed out my credit cards. I left on a faith hunt, and I was just sharing what I learned. I started with a newsletter list of like 20 people, and that's just kind of how it built. But it wasn't something that I like consciously decided to do. There was just a whole lot of things that I consciously decided I could not continue doing, and so that's how it all ended up coming together.
So you mentioned that you had used a lot of drugs and alcohol to escape reality. I think virtually all people in our modern day can empathize with, if not that completely, certainly parts of it. Or if not, then they're using their phones for the same damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
Were you ever into psychedelics at that time, or was it more escapist in terms of like drinking, downers, that kind of stuff?
What a great question. So I was really lucky in the sense, so my older brother sold a lot of mushrooms. And so from age like 15 to 17, I took a lot of mushrooms. I took a lot of mushrooms. And I love that happened for me, because you get twatted on mushrooms, and when people are like, oh, let's take pills or something like that, I'm like, yo, if I want to get fucked up, like
I'm going to another dimension.
And it was really interesting because when I went back to California, like maybe 10 years ago, I ran into a lot of people that had been around me at that phase. And all of them had said to me, like, you changed my life. We were on mushrooms and you told me this thing that changed my life. I had no recollection of any of these, but the first time that I ever took mushrooms, I had this there's always like one epiphany that I can take back with me. And the epiphany that I had the first time I ever took mushrooms was like, I remembered my mom having this urge to bring a message to John F. Kennedy Jr. right at the time when his career was like at an ultimate peak. And she like just made that happen within like 2 weeks. She like was in the office with JFK Jr. and relayed him a message from his dad. And he died like 2 weeks after that. And this memory at that time, I was in a period of 7 years where I wouldn't speak to my mom at all, unless it was a medical emergency and I needed her to help me get some doctor stuff. But I remembered that, and it was like, I can do anything that I put my mind to. And it's so interesting because like, that's the message everyone hopes to get from their parents, is really like instill that in you. And by hook or by crook, it got to me. But I started my like journey with a lot of psychedelics. And then when I moved to New York, and I found out in San Diego, it was like really hard to get coke without like being nice to people. But when I it's like the worst. But when I moved to New York, it's like you call a number, in the morning or at night, there's a
delivery service.
I was like, this is great. And so I was very lucky to stay on, like, uppers for the most part were what did it for me. And alcohol. So alcohol, uppers give you a sense of control. It's like a root chakra lever. Numbers for the second chakra, takes pain away, helps you be dead without dying. But luckily, so all of my friends got super addicted to opiates. And luckily, and all together, like at the same time. And everybody was like, oh yeah, like get on this too. But I was like, this is expensive. It makes me puke. And they're like, yeah, you can't drink with opiates. I was like, what the fuck were I taking these opiates for then? So luckily, like my robust alcoholism kept me from getting addicted to opiates, because everyone else in my friend circle did. And a lot of them died. Yeah. So I'm really grateful to alcohol for that. But I'm
Can
really
I just pause you on that for 1 second?
I'll like never stop talking. So
I love the way that you phrase that. I'm really grateful for my alcohol addiction. One of the things I find very interesting about our society today is our apparent inability to accept anything but bipolarity in things. Like, oh, you had alcoholism, therefore it only was poison and toxic and terrible for you. And so even the idea that you can acknowledge that, oh, this thing that could have eventually killed me actually also saved my life in a bunch of other ways.
Oh,
In the same
yeah.
way we look at political figures or anybody of fame, and it's like they're either good orange man bad or good blah blah blah. And it's like, no, no, no. Everybody is a spectrum of things, and you can choose to see the full spectrum and take from that what is truth and real, or you can live in these little confines. So I just thought that was very, you don't talk to a lot of people who acknowledge what you just did, even though I don't think you realized you were doing it.
Well, that's integration. Like, so there's three levels of teachings, and the outermost level is the duality, the exoteric. So it's either good or bad. And this processes things through a form of like isolation, like let's get the bad over here and let's get the good over here. And this is just, nobody gets to the second level without graduating from the first level. But the second level is all about integration, where the concept of like other and bad no longer exists. Mm-hmm. And you really need that first level to understand what's good and bad for you. Like alcohol really doesn't work for me at all. It makes me super insecure, and I need confidence in my life. I thought that it made me confident, but it actually just made me super, super insecure. And I can't afford to be insecure in my life. But just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean it doesn't work for some people. And I know a lot of people that have relapsed on alcohol because they were dating someone that's like, this is fine. There's no such thing as an alcoholic. Like when you go into Tantra, when you go into second level teachings, that's the bottom line truth. Yeah, alcohol is not bad, but you really need that first level of like finding out that it just doesn't work for you. Because if you go into second level teachings without your own boundaries, like it straight up kills people. Mm-hmm. Salma Sadora is a really good example of somebody who died as a result of the no rules are the only rules of Tantra.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Salma Sadora expert, but she was a Tantra teacher that I really looked up to. And a lot of Tantra teachers, even Osho, I deeply research any teacher I ever come across. And Salma Sadora died, pills and booze, at the end of her life. Osho was addicted to nitrous and Percocets, which is totally fine and that could have been totally fine for him. It's not but I know that something like that would really not work for me. And if you were looking at something, Aleister Crowley, heroin could have been totally fine for him, but let's look at the whole quality of life. Were things going better and better? Like if we look at the career, it's like, or was he moving further and further into losing a lot of his followers, becoming more and more unhappy, becoming more and more angry? Things are only that way when we're out of alignment. And when we're out of alignment, or when we're off octave, to use a fourth way term, when we're off octave, we're there on a research mission. We're meant to learn what does and does not work. And we come back with a new boundary stronger, and that helps us to complete the mission. But when we don't, it's hard to come back on octave. You have to double down on all your spiritual practices. You have to put in what they call super efforts. And you have to do it happily without, anyone twisting your arm. You have to do it because you want the result. When you come back into alignment, it's great. But with substances, it can be, in my personal experience, it can be really hard. I don't really realize that something's not working for me until it's too late. And then I can become defensive about it, which can make it take even longer. Weed is something that I would have never quit if CPS hadn't gotten called on me. And I would have just never thought that it would be a good time to quit. Sometimes it takes me a pretty rude awakening. And I pray a lot to be shown early on when something doesn't work. But the thing with like second level teachings where they're like, and especially with Tantra's like, do whatever you want. If it's not for you, it'll fall away. But like the fine print on that is like, and if this life is not for you, then this life will fall away. And
are you familiar with Teal Swan?
yes, very.
And I feel like she has that sort of attitude, possibly to a fault. Like, yeah, we're all just making perpetual trips around this sun. And so maybe this isn't your ride. So if you want to step off, step off. I think she's caught a lot of heat for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've known that about her for a while. And I used to, so like, Teal Swan had the reputation of being like the suicide, they called her and Bentina Massaro like the suicide twins. And I remember she got a lot of it, and I know because it's had a really big impact on me. It's a little bit of like a segue into suicide, but I remember when she got a lot of heat for some people like dying that were students of hers. And it's never really clear like how much of a devotee somebody was. Like it's a lot of responsibility. If they watch your video on YouTube, is it your fault that they died? But the Swamini Chinanda people had sent a response saying that like if you kill yourself, then she used the analogy of like a rental car. Like if you kill yourself, then it's like driving a Maserati. If you crash it the next time around, they don't give you a Maserati again. You end up with like, a crappy car. And that really made sense to me. I was like, damn, that really made sense to me. But then my best friend killed herself. And oh man, it was so painful because for so long I like just didn't understand like where she was and what was going on. And for years. And it was really, and that happened when I was like 8 months pregnant. So
Jesus Christ,
go into that. And she had chronic back pain for like 3 years, could not get any help for it, was spending all of her money to go to specialists, could not get painkillers for it. I was like, you need to just get comfortable with being on heroin. And she like couldn't get her brain. She was like, no, I like can't become a junkie. The like junkie stigma was really strong. And her life was like the last year of her life was like incessant pain. And so I was like really conflicted because I'm like, I would have fucking killed myself too, straight up. But this philosophy really like believes that. And it wasn't until I like worked with a really great medium named Mary Greasy and was able to talk to my friend afterwards about like what happens in that setting. And also from some studies I did in Fourth Way where they talk about recurring, where you live the same life over and over until you get it right. My views around suicide have relaxed a lot, especially as I continue to attract like darker and darker individuals, and even just within my own family. And like the right to take your own life is ultimately like your right. And none of us really know for sure what happens afterwards. But I'm really, as I get deeper into mesoteric teachings of oneness, like trying to understand that like what's right for somebody, like what's right for Teal Swan might be totally right for her and her people. And even if there's mishaps, like it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Even Saul Isadora dying, like that might have been right for her and for
who's
this
to say what's good or bad.
Exactly. But where the danger comes in, and I really see this in myself, is like observing, waiting to see like somebody else's punishment. Like, are they going to get shit for this? So like with Saul Isadora, for a long time, I was like watching her career being like, is this the worst thing that could ever happen to somebody? And in some ways, yeah, but like, how am I supposed to say, how could I say that that's wrong? I can't. All I can say is like, I can see how this is right, because Saul Isadora dying, she was kind of like my big ticket on Tantra of like, I can still drink and it'll be okay. Like, look at this amazing teacher with amazing opportunities, and her selfie of like wine in the bathtub. Like, I want to have wine in the bathtub. When she died, the message for me was like really clear, like, get sober if you want to mess with this stuff, because if you don't, it'll really hurt you.
I think that's a really good time to sort of bring in a little bit about the fourth way and what that all
Ah,
means, because I think for the uninitiated, right? Because I'll give you a little background on myself. I grew up Catholic, 13 or so, decided to just exit the system. It made no sense to me. And then lived the rest of my life until about 38 as a atheist leaning agnostic,
mhm.
and had a profound spiritual awakening. I won't go into the whole story about it. But prior to that happening, I was just surrounded by largely just materialists embedded in this plane, living under the spell, deeply in the matrix, is how I would describe it. So I think when people look at spirituality or mysticism or any of these things, they tend to think of sort of the other three ways, right? Whether it's I'm becoming a monk or whatever the things are, it's to the exclusion of everything else. So could you just give a little background for those who don't know anything about any of the ways as to sort of how they differ and why you see the fourth way as like the path of highest order?
Yeah, for sure. And it's, everyone's got a different lineage. So some people, for people that are fourth way students, it's a taste like no other. When you hear it, you're like, this makes sense to my brain. And it feels so good because for that, it doesn't require trust. And I'm not saying that the fourth way, as in Gurdjieff teachings, are there's many ways that could fit in the fourth way. So the fourth way, and I feel like there's more fourth way style teachings available to us now as we realize that we want a complete package. So there's the three classic paths to enlightenment are known as the way of the fakir. And a fakir is somebody who, would hold their arm up over their head to achieve enlightenment or be on a bed of nails. And basically, like in learning how to override the demands of the body, they have extra energy that they could push into higher centers. And so enlightenment, if we were to talk about it from a fourth way perspective, and in fourth way, there's no trust. Everything's just weighed and measured, right? So what you're trying to do is take your extra energy and push it to the higher intellectual centers and the higher emotional centers. The higher intellectual centers would give you objective reason, which means that when you ask your brain a question, it gives you an answer and there's no more questions. Like the answer is the answer and it's just, and then the higher emotional centers is all of the clairs being able, and again, there's no questioning what it is that you're receiving. It's just, and you see the unseen, the unknown. The higher emotional is actually much more refined than the higher intellectual, but the higher intellectual is really useful for data. And so that's how so if you were to sacrifice the body, you'd have extra energy that you could, and as it overflows out of the lower centers, it would push up into the higher centers. But you have a withered arm. You can't ever take your arm down. And that sucks for me. So then there's the way of the monk. And the way of the monk is like, let's get all the emotional distractions, and we would include sexual in that for this conversation. But the desires and the feelings, if we get ourselves into a state where we're not tempted by external things, the desire for more, if we're not tempted by, any kind of sexual urges, if we're cut off from society, then we have this surplus of energy from our emotional center that could be shunted into the higher, and we achieve enlightenment that way. And also, like historically, the best spiritual secrets were reserved for people that had were renunciates in that way. And so there was, even if we take the enlightenment aspect out of it and we're just like, here's what you get for that, people were only entrusted with the deepest spiritual secrets if they were not ever going to go back into the world and disseminate them in that way. And so then there's the path of the monk, the path of the yogi. And the yogi kind of has the best shot because they have their complete body And they also have their feelings intact and can be in the world. They don't have to go away somewhere. But the yogi is like, I'm going to try and get rid of the mind to
The
be
ego.
able to get to enlightenment that way. And the mind is always active. And so if you were to really move it out of the way, you'd have to just get rid of it altogether to be like without mind. And this can make it really difficult to pass the teachings along. It can also make it really difficult to live life. And you were given the mind for a reason. The fourth way is like, let's keep all these parts. And so the fourth way is really brutal. Like, it's not for the faint of heart, because basically you have to look at what you thought was yourself, like this enlightened being moving far on their journey, and be confronted with the reality that like you obey your mind and you obey your feelings and you obey your body, and you're not the master of these things at all. And as a result, like, how could you really advance spiritually? Like, all these spiritual teachings are based on the assumption that you're an autonomous human being, you know, that says, I'm going to meditate every day, and you'll actually do it, when actually you say, I'm going to meditate and I'm going to fast. And then this person says, I'm going to eat pizza and I'm going to pick my face. And you can't actually progress until you bring all of these, because they don't get along. All these personalities are arguing with each other. So you have to bring them into one cohesive mass, and then become the master of that. And it's very humbling. It's not humiliating, but it's really humbling. And we get super attached to like our story. And, you know, I was like, you guys, I don't understand me. Like, I'm a special case here. And it took, like, I would say 6 months of really dedicated work of observing myself behaving robotically, being like, why, when I say I'm not going to nitpick at my husband, I'm doing it even though I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
Why will it not listen to me? Why will it not listen to me? And starting to realize, like, oh shit, like, I'm it. Like, I'm not an I'm an it. Like, what the fuck? I don't want to be an it. But once I realized that, I was on my knees, and for the most part, with the exception of this moment for about 6 months where I thought I was enlightened, because I did a fourth way objective enlightening. And so technically I had activated that, but I wasn't behaving in a loving way. I just had a huge ego.
For people who aren't yet at rock bottom, because I think rock bottom forces people in one of two paths. Either you get on the path and you may take 2 steps before you end up dying, or you might make it to much higher levels of spirituality or enlightenment, or they exit the game, right? That, generally speaking, seems to be what happens if you hit rock bottom. But for folks who aren't quite there yet but are suffering greatly, it seems to me that the biggest barrier to entry is that acceptance that you are the only one in your own way. You are literally doing it to yourself. There's nothing being done to you, which is not to say that bad things have not happened in your sphere around you that impacted you, especially when you were young and there was nothing, you couldn't possibly be awake. It's not possible. And so most people who are hurt, really badly hurt, who continue to hurt themselves, are doing it because they can't inspect the piece of them that is doing this continual self-flagellation over time. Because if they took off the armor around their heart and took an objective look and saw, oh, this is me, I'm doing it, the shame collapse would be like a neutron star and they couldn't handle it. So how do people who are in that kind of a situation where they're causing their own demise, but could just step aside for a second, take a breath, and take that first step on the path? Like, how do you see people coming to that point without hitting rock bottom, or maybe you don't see that they do?
Well, what a great question. What a great question. And I really think that the main reason that we're all incarnated on level one. So let's think of like the three levels of teaching: the exoteric, duality; the mesoteric, oneness; and then the esoteric, which is just God, direct contact with God. We all incarnated on the first level. Nobody got out of that. That's why we incarnated as humans. And awakening and enlightening is like working ourselves out of that dualistic thinking into oneness. So nobody is immune to this, because, you know, whether we're talking about like epigenetics or culture or whatever, we've been steeped in God language for so long. And I really learned the hard way in 2020 that it just doesn't go away, even if you know that it makes no sense. Even if you know that it makes no sense. If you were conditioned with that in your childhood, if you were conditioned, even if you didn't grow up in a religious place whatsoever, your parents had judgments about what was right and wrong, what happens when people do wrong, like that. You can live in a dualistic universe, even if you intellectually know that the universe is all one. You can believe in a universe that punishes and rewards. And so when people can't step outside and see that they're doing it to themselves, it's because they unconsciously believe that God's doing it to them and they don't have control over it. And of course they're going to think that way. And people don't want to, they can't see themselves to give themselves that line of questioning, like, why do you think God doesn't like you? And when this happened for me, like, because I had been a life coach for like 2 years at that point, but it just wasn't working on me. And when I really like sat down one day, like, and this was my rock bottom. Physically, I wouldn't say I was looking at a rock bottom. You know, financially, I wouldn't say I was at a rock bottom, but I got to rock bottom where I was like, why do I think that the universe likes everybody else but not me? Why does these teaching works for everybody else but not me? And my mind's like, I don't know. Like, and I said to myself, I'm not fucking getting up from this seat until I get an answer. And so I don't know. I said, okay, well, if you did know, what would it be? And finally, like, and I'm really sitting with myself at this point, like, I have to know why I believe this. And one of the hardest days of my life. And the question came up, like, because I'm dirty. So why are you dirty? I don't know. Why are you dirty? And I finally, in that moment, accepted that I had been molested as a child a lot. Now, just because I was molested as a child doesn't mean that I'm dirty, but I didn't know that I believed that. And so I had no personal accountability because I thought it was being done to me because I thought I deserved it. And the biggest breakthrough I think a person could have would be like, why do you think that God doesn't like you? Why do you think? Because if you believe that, you can read all of the stuff, intellectual stuff about how we're all one and there's no punishment, and you can have compassion for people who are worse off for you and compassion for people that are better off than you. But for you, it's just like, must be nice, you know, or would be. It doesn't sink in. Kind of the same way where, like, when you hate yourself, if someone's saying, I love you, you're like, if you knew me, you wouldn't love me. So go away.
When you had that experience of recognizing what the block was, because I've had several experiences like that myself, not the same story, but of knowing I was blocked, sitting down at my fire pit outside and saying, I'm not fucking getting up until I figure out what this is, and constantly getting distracted. It's like, nope, come back to it. Nope, come back to it. And then for me, how it ended up releasing was very somatically and with an incredible amount of tears, like convulsive crying.
Same.
So you said it was just the same?
Yeah. Same for me. Oh my God. I was in the fetal position on my floor, like feeling like I was barking and crying. And I felt, but in me, I knew that I had found it.
Mm-hmm.
Because like that feeling of the block moving is like you know what that is. And I've actually walked a lot of people through this process in my workshop Wheels Reinvented, where we get to that bottom story of in the root of each chakra. So like, why are you so afraid? Why do you think God doesn't like you? Why do you think this shouldn't be happening? Like, we get to the root of all of these places, and then for almost everybody it releases in that way. For some people it's like, you know, and amused, like, huh, look at that, weird that I would think that way. But really, like, even though the block was moved in that moment, there was a lot of work that I was going to have to do to keep it from getting infected. It's like basically you've opened it up, and now you need to change your lifestyle to support that. And now you need to start thinking in a new way. Like, now you're aware of the problem. Now it's time to work it. Because I actually didn't. I was like, okay, so like I'm good, right? And at the time I was taking a lot of, if I had a big issue, I would take LSD. Once LSD started hitting me, I'm like, I can talk to cops on LSD, baby. Can't do that on mushrooms. Like, this is my new shit right here. Price point was perfect. But so like I cleared that shame by accepting what had happened to me. And then I met my soulmate, who I'm married to now, like 2 weeks after that. But then 2 weeks after that, I was sexually assaulted by an elder at a sex lodge, a sweat lodge. And it was actually like my partner's, the sweat lodge was on his property. He was at Sundance, so really committing to this Lakota, the Red Road, you know, big deal to go to Sundance. And while he was at Sundance, I was at the sweat lodge praying for him, and the guy pouring the lodge sexually assaulted me. And I didn't want to report it because I would have.
This is just 2 weeks or a few weeks after you had just released the block from all the molestation trauma.
So 4 weeks after that, 2 weeks after meeting my partner.
Unreal.
And the guy's name was like Uncle Rick. And where I grew up, we had to call everyone auntie and uncle. So it was like a mirror of the trauma. And so I was like, I gotta take some LSD, because I had 4 days of waiting for my partner to get back so that he could handle it. I didn't want to get the cops involved because it was like a compound. So the cops, the zoning, I grew up in a cult, so I know what's going to get shut down. And I didn't want to, shut down my new boyfriend's like entire everything. I assumed that they would just take the offender and be like, you're not allowed to be here anymore. But instead they took us and were like, you're not allowed to be here anymore. But I had these 4 days of doing everything that I could with, I took peyote, I took mushrooms with Syrian rue to try and make a DMT effect. I took LSD, and none of this stuff worked for releasing that shame. What it was going to take was like a total change of lifestyle. So it was, I don't really, now when I teach people and like opening up the trauma and healing the trauma, I always give them a homework, like, and now you got to like ask yourself this question every day, or now you got to start saying no to people. And because it doesn't necessarily, when the trauma is not healed, it'll still pull more of it in. And so accepting the degree to which I had been abused, and it would take me 5 years to like fully accept that.
Wow. That is, first of all, I'm sorry for everything that ever happened to you. I also appreciate that it's created you and the gift that you are now presenting to the world, but it doesn't negate all of the hurt and shit that you had to go through to get there, because that sucks. So I'm sorry about that.
Thanks a lot for saying that. That demonstrates a high level of understanding, and people listening to this in the future, like, that's exactly how you should respond. That's exactly how you should respond to something like that.
You have brought up LSD and mushrooms. Well, I guess I brought up psychedelics first. Have you ever gotten to a point where you sort of collapse into God and you experience I am, and I am all that is? And does that freak you the fuck out? Because it did for me.
I've never had that experience on psychedelics, but I did have that experience from the objective awakening that I did with the fourth way.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, when you get to a certain level of awakening where you actually have activated those higher centers, because drugs will get you there, but they won't get you back. So you can like taste it and it'll be
Right.
but once you activate those higher centers, every time you say, I am, you'll feel like a reverberation and you'll shake and echo internally. And if you don't keep doing that work, like I was like, let me just check and see if I have it, and I don't have it, then they warn you about this. They're like, it goes away if you stop working it. Like you have to keep doing those I am meditations and really like building that force.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for reminding me of this, because I really miss that taste and I really want it back. But when I had it, it didn't freak me out because I knew exactly what it was and I had been working to achieve that. And I really miss it now that it's not there. And so I'm definitely going to have to work in that area. That's it. I am is like part of, so the sacred impulses that are given to humans have like 3 words. So there's I am, which is like the most powerful and the first one, but with it also comes I can. And then after that comes I wish. So I am is like just existing because, and it's connecting with the spatial aspect of things and seeing space is what brings us all together, but we see it in the human plane as like being what divides us, but it's identifying with like the oneness and the totality. And that's the reverberation, is like the what everything is vibrating and suspended in. I can then is like what you're able to do as a result of, because if you just had I am, then all that would be is, well, just existing is enough. And that would be like a nice version of enlightenment, but you wouldn't be motivated to, the way of the bodhisattva wouldn't be there. You wouldn't be wanting to help other people out of the collective misery that everyone's in. So I can becomes your ability to do with I am what you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, there's I wish. And I wish is the ability to see and create and maintain worlds, to have a vision for something that's not yet existing and know without a shadow of a doubt that it's been created and it's real.
I struggle with that last one mightily because I ascribed early to a lot of the sort of Buddhist and never mind the labels, just ways that basically say, if you're going to reach nirvana, if you're going to get into a state of heaven, let's assume that heaven is a state we exist in, not a place we go.
Mm-hmm.
Then to get to that state, you must surrender. And by surrendering, you're surrendering to the flow of the universe, all that God's will is, right? And if you read all the texts, they all end up saying the same damn thing. But if that's what you really do, if you fully, truly surrender to the matrix of all that has ever happened until this moment, and the universe has a prescription for what the exact next best thing to do would be every instant, and if flow state is reading that like a ticker tape, and you're just surfing through whatever the universe wants, and that's getting to godliness, then how can you wish for something? Because I have a really hard time conceptualizing how could this entity, even if it's at the soul level, it's still a sub-level to the Almighty. How could that wish not take me off of the path of what the universe wants?
Really solid question. Really solid question. And this was one that I was really like stuck on for a long time, is like, if I have a wish, am I surrendered? And learning about the true nature of desire. And I had like UPGs, unverified personal gnosis, my own feelings about the usefulness of desire. But it was really Sadhguru in his course, Inner Engineering, that really helped me to understand this. It felt really validating to have a teacher that I respect as much as I respect him. He really consistently serves it. Fourth way is an amazing lineage, but I don't recommend doing fourth way on its own because there's no love in the fourth way. And if you follow, there's no love because it says maybe we could do this without a Godhead or without love, or we could just math our way into enlightenment. And you can. And I've done that. But I was an asshole. And Gurdjieff was an asshole. But I am writing an erotic fiction book about Gurdjieff to help
nice.
understand fourth way in more practical terms. It's about being seduced by a guru too. So I really want it to be like a mind fuck for people. That's also like very awakening. But Sadhguru had once remarked on Gurdjieff, because he had all these different tactics for waking people up that were, questionable, and they worked, but Sadhguru said, like, but love speaks instantly. Like if you can love them, like it works so much faster. And so Sadhguru is a teacher that I really, really respect. And in his inner engineering course, I learned that desire is the voice of the soul. And the soul is never going to stop wanting things. It's never trying to be free of desire is like trying to be free of your mind. Like it's not meant to shut up, because what the core desire is of the soul is to be without the body. To be without the body. And because it's not going to do that until it's dead, then it's here to inspire you to want more, because that desire guides you to where it is that you want to go. And you can trust that your desire is getting you to where it is that you want to go. And so if we think about like early man, let's think about like how, and I love the stoned ape theory and how like much psilocybin contributed to agriculture. But something just to think about, like a metaphor is like, let's say the first person who wanted blueberries, and it didn't grow where they were, and blueberries were not in the flow of their life. It wasn't in the flow for what was going on around them. They could have eaten anything else as fuel, but it was a desire. I don't need, and humans are the only ones that can get more than just what we need. It's activating our real potential is to pursue what we want, because needs never manifest. Everything you need is given to you, is provided along the path in that flow. But to really awaken, like wants are there to guide us towards how we could achieve more than enough, more than just what's, on the path. In the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, he says, do more than is required of you. And if you didn't have a vision or a wish or a desire for more, then that wouldn't be possible. We wouldn't have blueberries. And so the thing that makes a wish, when you're making a wish for something, when you are looking at that wish, look at everything else but you in that frame. Look at everything else but you and see how that impacts positively like everyone else. But
so is that the secret? Is that the difference between hedonistic desire and this more divine wishing is, does the wish center around gaining you something, or is it simply to elevate all around you?
So what you start to see as you get more familiar with it is that like the more what you want serves all humanity. And so, and this is the importance of going through that first level of the exoteric and learning through trial and error what does and what does not work for you. But so I'll give you a really clear example. I was in like surrender mode for a while where I was like, God, bring me whatever house you want me to live in. Do with me whatever you want. I didn't have a clear vision. And so because I didn't have a clear I wish, I didn't have a clear I can, because I wasn't trying to do anything more than...
You're describing my last 2 years, by the way. It's been a bit of a rocky situation, right? It's like, oh, I'll just take whatever's happening. This is great.
Heard. I know. It's so frustrating. And it's all paradox in the second level, right? The effort and surrender. It's basically praying every day to be like, show me what you would have me do. Here's my plan for how I think it could work. And it's not something that you can just ding, but having the symbol, the three levels of teaching, it's story in the outermost, myth and parable in the second, and symbol at the third, and maybe a myth or a parable about this junction will come through for us. But I was just like, let whatever happen. I just want to be of service. Just do whatever you would have me do. And as a result, like, I just didn't make anything for like 2 years because it wasn't really in flow. I was also smoking weed at the time. And so my desires weren't coming from even my desire to smoke weed. I wasn't even smoking weed in response to the desire to like get high. I was smoking weed out of habit, which is, so it wasn't coming from a divine place, and learning how to trust that my desires were coming from a divine place, but separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, of like what habits needed to go to be able to hear desires clearly. And even deeper than that, I was getting desires for like a nicer home for ourselves, but I wasn't thinking about like how that could serve all of humanity. But it turns out that like I do my best. Business is a big aspect of what I teach. I'm very much about like enlightenment should be something you should be working in the world. You should be doing your service in the world. Like, enlightenment shouldn't mean that you like go, you should be working to get that message out and stabilizing the base. And the more secure and happy and inspired you are, the more you can deliver to the world.
Ram Dass has been great about having a lot of teachings on that concept of like, you don't reach enlightenment, or you could, but the point isn't to go live in a cave in samadhi. Like, who gives a shit? Then you die and you went samadhi. But like, who cares? It does nothing for anybody else. Being in the path of your life and using whatever the things are that come at you to slowly evolve into something else, and to help other people around you through your evolution, even just being proximal to it, right? Being able to maybe pick up nuggets of that, or rubbing off energetically as we're raising. If we're all raising each other, then maybe that does something. But then that begs the question, so what? If we are part of this great karmic wheel that has turned infinitely, and if you really meditate on what infinity is, it will freak you the fuck out. If it doesn't, then you didn't get deep enough. What is the point? I end up in then like a nihilistic loophole, and it's not all the time, but occasionally it will happen, where it's like, yeah, but I've already lived every life. I've already experienced everything. This is just one, it's like a movie reel. And so whether I exit the game or I win the game, whatever the fuck that could even mean, of what consequence is it?
Baby, the point is to enjoy it.
And that is a very interesting concept. And I think that if you don't consider that God created all of this for the joy of experiencing it, it's really hard to come to that conclusion. Very hard. And that's the thing that ultimately pulls me back into like, well, I did this for a reason. So I, right? Like, this all has to have been generated for some purpose. And if we assume that the purpose was to have experience at all, then we are living in the Garden of Eden, no matter what the experience is. Even you as a child, all the hell that you went through, that was still in the Garden of Eden, because it's contrasted to the cold, dark void of space, where there's no sight, no sound, no emotion, nothing. And so then it's like, okay, well, maybe I can get back to getting on with it and enjoying things. And then all of a sudden, the tastes are tastier and the sights are, more beautiful and the hugs are better. But man, it's really interesting how as you go through this path, there's all these little like tripwires that could really fuck you up if you let them.
Yeah, really. And like, the more powerful that you get, the more subtle these tripwires are and the more detrimental. What it sounds like you're describing, and this is even with Ram Dass, Buddhism, just people that have transcended desire. Mm-hmm. The temptation is great, right? Like, the temptation to transcend desire is like very great. And Ram Dass is amazing, but anytime I read too much Ram Dass, I'm like, fuck business.
Right.
Ram Dass is a very good renunciate. Don't forget he renunciated his whole birthright, which
Right.
he could have built a huge ass center and helped a lot of people. And I'm not saying that this was wrong. But that is the path of the renunciate, and the path of the renunciate is all, like, let's do it without anything and see how that goes. And all of these different expressions of life and observing all of these different teachers are here to teach us, like, well, what do we want to do? They did what they did. What can we learn from that? And how do we want to do it differently? I was on Ram Dass's newsletter all the way up until the end of his life. And there was a lot of things, especially in regards to finances, that I was like, and I don't want to go down like that. Even Jesus as a teacher, I said from the very beginning, I don't want that. 12 followers and dying on a cross that's a no for me. So like, if I can get out of that, I would like to get out of that. They're all here to just teach. And Ram Dass said, like, we're here to steal from teachers, right. Get everything you can from a teacher and do with it what you will. There was something that I was not aware of for a long time, and it's something called the erotic. And the erotic is desire. The erotic has nothing to do with sex. The erotic is about desire. And it is very possible. So if we talk about the three paths to enlightenment, we could call it like the spiritual, the physical, and the erotic. And we're really only told about the spiritual and the physical. A lot of us, when we're thinking about working, it's like, should we be working our outer more or our inner more? And we put it into these two categories. And in exoteric living, they're like, is the desire for more, is it physical and worldly, or is it spiritual and godly? And all of us do not put it in the spiritual and godly category. If we had 3 kettlebells and we didn't know that there were 3 places for each kettlebell, we were always trying to put the weight of desire in either the physical or the spiritual category, we'd never be balanced. We'd be excellent servants to society because we'd be constantly repressing something that is not repressible. And so if desire is the voice of the soul, it's not the voice of spirit, God, but it's the voice of your soul, like what incarnates with you into body after body. And it's never going to be satisfied until it's ultimately free of the body. And so its purpose is to kind of constantly bump up on the limitation of the body and guide it in that way so that you can do more than just enough. There's not enough, and more than enough. And the force of desire is meant to guide us towards more than enough. But when we repress this because we don't know what to do with it, or we feel like we're doing the right thing, or just because we weren't told about it, that's why so many marriages are failing. And why when I hired my 4th way teacher, I was like, can you help me with this, Erin? She's like, I don't know either. I really dedicated my life, that was starting in 2019, to learning about this thing that I thought meant sex. But when we stop wanting, when we stop desiring, what's the point of it all really starts to come into play, because it's like, I already have everything that I need. Right. And you can always hear when somebody's erotic, and when your erotic is dead, it's dead in all areas of life. I couldn't imagine ever needing anything more than this. I couldn't imagine ever needing to have more than I have now. I couldn't imagine ever needing to write another book. It's not about need. It's not about need. It's about want. And we never have to activate the want side of life, but it is this unique opportunity that a squirrel doesn't have, that a human does, to go above and beyond just because you want it. And learning how to trust, how to surrender to that desire and trust that it's not leading you. We get this fear like, well, if we all just surrender to our desire, we'll have a world full of pedophiles, and that's conditioning that you have to learn how to get through. But so when
it's probably a divine, if you assume it comes from the soul, let's assume that the soul is divine in some way, as it's a substructure of the one, and that there's a difference between a primal desire for intercourse, let's say, and more of an erotic desire for creativity and connection and whatever other things might be higher order than that, right? Because they're not the same thing. In that sort of carnal desire area, I feel like when you have so many blocks in your lower chakras, like everybody does, until you remove them. Like no one gets through childhood safe, right? Because the
No.
worst thing that ever happened to you is the worst thing that ever happened to you.
Mhm.
And it blocked something somewhere. If your energy is all fucked up, then the things you're going to act out are going to be in a bizarre service to trying to clear those blocks or make you whole in a way that can never happen until the blocks are gone. So like chasing money and cars and fame and all the shit that we see drives people to suicide and whatever at the pinnacle of their careers, let's say. One of my concerns about manifesting or prayer or any of those types of things where it's like I'm channeling, you know, a feeling, a sensation, vibration, however you want to talk about it, to through the quantum change this dimension into something that I want to see. My concern with that is I have not gone deeply into magic or, you know, any of the sides of this where I'm sure after we burned all the women who knew how to fucking do it, we lost touch with all the answers to the test. But something tells me in my gut that if you manifest something that is not divine and is in fact coming from elsewhere, the after effects of that are going to be like tenfold crippling. Like, oh, I want $1 million. Great, congratulations, here's $1 million. Both your kids died in a car accident. Or your wife left you, or whatever. And you could say, well, how are those things possibly connected? But if everything's connected, then how could it not be connected? I don't know if any of that makes any damn sense.
No, it makes total sense because this is it's a paradox. All second level teachings are going to be paradoxical, so it's not going to be like this always situation. And one of the main ways that people get out of the like control aspect of manifesting, which is outermost level, and to the surrender aspect, which is second level, is when you manifest something that you really didn't want, and you're like, this is horrible, you got exactly what you wanted and you hate it. Or like in my case, when my fiance died, something happens that I really didn't want, and it's actually perfect for me and it has my name on it. If it's not meant to manifest, it's not going to manifest. If it's not meant to manifest, it's not going to manifest. Like we only have a small little bit of control. And the control is like we can create the vision for what it is that we want to create. We can't create the how it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
We can't create the timeline in which it's going to happen. And if it's not meant for us, like me doing everything I could to manifest the guy that was wrong for me, it's just not going to happen. So you get benched pretty quick and be like, look, this is not how it's going to go down. And in that way, like, and that's what they talk about with like non-attachment. Like you work really hard without attachment to the results, but you won't know what you're working towards if you don't have some kind of vision for where it's going to go. And so it's like you have that wish and you have that desire of what it is that you want to create. And that's what motivates you to keep showing up and doing the work. But ultimately, you can't, if it's not meant to happen, it's just not going to happen, because no matter how much you shake your fist at the sky, little man, big God. It's not going to work in that way. But if we say, okay, well, I'm just not going to do anything and just whatever, I'm going to let life happen, how it's going to happen, trusting that whatever shows up is for me. That's also a great way to live life. And you should be doing that 50% of the time. But when all you're doing is that, there's not incentive to keep striving for more. And the underlying belief that like desire is bad. And I don't ever want anyone to like assume anything like, okay, desire is the voice of the soul, so I'm just going to listen to that now. You would want to like examine your own past and be like, okay, when has my desire really gotten me in trouble? For example, let's say I have a like overactive desire for sex. You would really need to look at that and be like, is all the times that I had sex to the point of it being like a sex addiction, was that, what was the deal with that desire? What was the deal with it? Why, how can I avoid that happening again? And sometimes we see that like it's an addiction to intimacy that you're never going to get from sex, that you're trying to numb something, that you're trying to resolve an argument, that you're trying to make something go away. The interesting thing about working with sex magic is that you realize that like waves of desire don't usually impact you alone. Like if you're in sacred partnership, like the wave of desire will come through a lot less frequently than people think maybe that it should, that you're responding to a primal urge and not a habit and not a desire to be somewhere else. And, you know, when it comes to conscious conception and things like that, like everything really is divinely organized. There's a flow to that true desire for what it actually is, and not maybe somewhere you think that it could get you. And my desires have gotten me into a lot of trouble in the past. And the frustration with like wanting more definitely let me be like, I'm just sick of wanting more. So I'm just going to let things happen to me. And then 6 months later, I'm like, fuck, that didn't work. It's a combination of having like a high goal that you want to work towards, as well as being completely surrendered to the timeline, or if God has a different plan for you. And I don't think that there's a way, with the exception of being aware that it's a process and that one day you will understand how that yin yang of effort and surrender and, you know, saying you don't need help while at the same time asking for help, how these things work together. But what I want to point out is that like, you've never made $1 million and lost both of your kids in a car accident.
No.
But maybe you saw somebody else make $1 million and they lost their kids in the car accident, and you say, that's God, you know, or that's how that works, or that's karma, or that's what you get when you do this. And all of that is thinking that's ultimately going to like pull you down, because what we have to do is see that as happen, you know, not see these things as being related, because then it becomes our block. Oh, well, look what happened. You got $1 million, you were pursuing wealth, and now you lost your family. Are you happy now? I'm never going to do that. Learning how to see it as being exactly what it was. Being exactly what it was, and maybe exactly what that person, like, I never thought that me losing my fiance might lead me to where I was supposed to go. Joan Didion lost her husband and her daughter within a few months of each other, and that was exactly what was on course for her life. One of my biggest fears about surrendering to God was like, well, what if you take my kids away? You know, am I going to be a teacher like that?
Book of Job, right? Like the more I get into the religious side of things, and so much of it feels true, also radically misinterpreted in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But like the concept that, okay, if I'm going to reach heaven on earth, I need to be willing to sacrifice anything, because my kids aren't mine. I'm a shepherd for what has been given to me, just like every other thing, including my body. I'm just in service to whatever the almighty thing is that's running the show. And that can be really scary. Yes,
it really can be. And the story of Abraham and Isaac is one that's like stumped a lot of scholars. You know, it's like you have to be, it's a strange story. You have to be willing to sacrifice anything. But it's like, I wouldn't say that I have this story figured out either. Jordan Peterson, when he did it, all of his commentaries on the psychological significance of the Bible stories are pretty interesting.
I watched his entire YouTube series on it, and that was actually the very beginning of my like ability to bridge the just pure mental aspects into the religious, because I was so atheist because of the bad taste that I had from Catholicism. He was a perfect bridge. And then I read his book, Maps of Meaning, and that blew my fucking mind.
Yeah, I haven't read that book, but I started because it's on YouTube as well. Super, super awesome teacher. Super awesome teacher. Now, something that's interesting is like, so let's just like bring it back to the objective. We have 3 levels. And so there's like religion, duality. And duality is the known and the comfortable. And the oneness is different. The oneness is totally different. It says there is no bad, there is no right, there is no wrong. And you're really just in that role of the observer where, you know, and I have not mastered this because I'm still like, Was Salma really just supposed to die, or what? Did she relapse in a really crazy way? You know, it's still things that I'm piecing together. But because I've descended in consciousness before, like when 2020 stuff happened, I was like, these are clearly signs of the times. And I like just couldn't fucking get that out of my head. I didn't know it was doomsday conditioning from growing up in a cult. And I knew that, like, if we're in oneness, then this has to be happening. We shouldn't be fighting it. We should be surrendering to it, finding ways to go around it. But I just couldn't, when things are uncontrollable, the desire to go into the known is so strong, because then we can like make sense of it. But if it's coming from a higher, then it's so easy to like descend into the thinking of like right and wrong and judgment and punishment and all of that. Kanye West is a really good example of this right now, because it's like he knows intellectually that oneness, creativity is, you know, that God is love, that the sun shines on all people equally, but the known comfortability of well, there's right and wrong and like holy war and all of that. It is so, that's the ego that needs to get left behind in the ascent to consciousness. And it's so freaking hard to get rid of. It's really hard to get rid of. And it's especially hard to just observe things the way that they are. I've not mastered this, but because I did learn the hard way that going back towards dualistic thinking is not the answer, there's no turning back for me now. Even if I don't like it, anytime I catch myself in a situation like today where I'm like, am I still judging Saul Isidora's death as being something not right? I have to like literally just make the symbol of the triangle with my hands and be like, just view from the top. It wasn't right. It wasn't wrong. It just is. It is exactly what it was. And I can leave the label behind and focus on myself. Not mastered, but
I find the people who are the most righteous, and I'm just going to use the term the woke mob, seem to be the ones least capable of that whole aspect of it all just is. Like, we can't change the world. I can't change what's going on across the world because I can barely make my own fucking bed. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we all have to be the masters of our own house and clean up from the inside out. And only if you are Buddha or Christ or somebody who made it really far could you extend out beyond maybe even your own community. And I feel like today we've got people who are trying to change the opposite sides of the planet and not doing any of the work on themselves. It's like an inside out type of scenario.
Yeah, but that's where it gets really complicated, because if we're all one, then the woke mob, then we are the woke mob. Then we're doing the exact same thing, but in our own way. And we're seeing it as different and separate, but it's something that we ourselves are doing. One of the hardest things, so like when I became enlightened objectively, I was like, well, now I definitely know what's up. So when people disagreed with me, I was like, well, check it out. I've got my diploma from here and you're wrong and I'm right. And I just couldn't leave that rightness behind. Yeah. And what I needed to learn how to do was see them as being 50% right. Like whatever people were accusing me of, spiritual bypassing. Yeah, I totally see how that could be true. I've got a lot to work with, not getting so offended when people were telling me I'm wrong, because like there's only right for me and people that it clicks and resonates with, and it'll be really wrong for other people. And that's okay. But it's just hard. But when Jordan Peterson talks about sacrifice in those, in that psychological significance thing, do you remember that part where he talks about sacrifice? Yeah. And I think his bottom line was that you don't really get anything without sacrifice. Right. But what was his deal with like the firstborn son thing?
I can't remember the exact components because it's been a while since I listened to it, but I've listened to a lot of him recently. And it seems to be that his notion of the logos is that we are pointed towards the good, the true, and the beautiful. and
Mm-hmm.
that those things together create a prism called love.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are pointed at those things and you give all of yourself, everything of yourself, to the point where you're fully aligned in service to that, then you are walking the hero's journey. And that's what the whole game is about. If you distill everything that's ever been written, everything that has seemed to have quote unquote worked out, right? When you look at whether they're deities on earth or, saints or whatever it seems to be that when you put yourself fully in service to that Holy Trinity, that is if you have to pick a point, because if you're not pointed towards something, then you're in chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And chaos is not fun and it's not productive.
Mm-hmm. And even just like in that prism, like the beautiful, like beauty is a path to enlightenment for real, making your life more beautiful, making your home space more beautiful. If that means making a lot of money and getting a greater house, like wonderful, because that's going to be getting you in the right direction. But understanding that like everybody is going to have a different definition of what is good and what is true and what is beautiful. Hitler probably thought that what is beautiful is a world without any races except for the Aryan race. And, ISIS
But let me challenge that notion for a second, because I've heard people defending that argument. I think that if you're still full of taint, right? If you've got all those samskaras and you're holding all that trauma energy, I don't think you can see with true intuition what the good, the true, and the beautiful are. I think only cleared out with a pure source of energy can you actually identify what those things are. And there might be moments where you are particularly aligned or you have a spark of whatnot, but people like that who I think were just hurt people hurting people. I don't think he was a demon. I don't think he was put on earth to be satanic and all this kind of stuff. It's just he was a really hurt fucking kid, and he just kept getting more hurt and ended up hurting a whole lot of people.
I'm sure that's something I learned from the fourth way that was hard for me to understand at first, is like everyone everywhere thinks they're right, is as convinced that they're right as you and I get convinced of our own rightness. People that shoot up mosques are like, God's telling me to do it. Every holy war was like, this is to defend the good, the true, and the beautiful. Everyone everywhere thinks they're right. And if we look at God as like nature is chaotic. Nature is calm. Nature is blissful. Nature is not all peace. Like right. Even just the polarity of like chaos and order. Nature is a balance of chaos and order. No matter how hard we try and understand it, unpredictable chaos occurs as a result of nature.
Required for creation.
Yes. And both of these things together is what creates life. If we had all good in the world, it wouldn't be life. An event like World War II, terrible, painful, awful, creates a ripple effect throughout all of time where we never want something like that to happen again. We want to catch anything that we see as going in that direction as early as possible and be able to say, we don't want another World War II. We don't want another Nazi apocalypse. We don't ever want this to happen again. It becomes like our thing, where it's like, I see this going in this direction. And it's very sobering for someone to be like, this is Nazi thinking. And they're like, right. Oh, it's Nazi. Like, yes, yes, it is. And from the perspective of like, let me judge, it's so hard when we see, and I love using Hitler as an example because the worst of the worst, so many reasons why it was a horrible thing to happen. The spiritual path is a pain in the ass, but the path of the observer is to not label it as good or bad or right or wrong and just say, this is what needed to happen because the universe always has to be in balance.
Yes.
So,
yin and yang. You can't push the black or the white out. It's always going to be, you're just moving it around inside the sphere.
Everyone will have a different definition of what is good and what is true and what is beautiful. Something that for them makes deep sense. It's something that they can devote their whole lives to. Even in the business book, Good to Great, he talks about the importance of businesses really being passionate about what they do. And he talks about like going and interviewing these different cigarette companies that are so passionate about how cigarettes are the best thing for the world. And they really believe that, and they're not bad and they're not brainwashed. Like, this is how they create the presence of cigarettes in humanity, because for them, it's good, it's true, and it's beautiful. And being able to follow your own personal good, true, and beautiful, and surrender everything to that, and be willing to say, you know, not my will, but thine be done, no matter what it is. Even if you want to take my kids, I surrender. And that was a big thing for me. I think that maybe that's why that story's in the Bible, because they're like, look, even Abraham did it, but like God, the real God, would never do something like that. It would never take your kids away to punish you. Would never do that. That's God, the patriarchal father. That's not the God of oneness. That's not. But I had a personal clause where I'm like, God, if you take my kids, I'm out. So, and now I don't have that clause anymore. Whatever happens, I'm going to say yes to it, because that was it's Joseph Campbell, when he met like his guru for the first time, one of his first gurus, he could ask him a question. And the question that he asked was like, look, if it's all coming from oneness, if it's all coming from God, then how can I say yes to God? And yes, this is your creation, while also saying no to starvation. And his guru smiled at him and said, for people like us, we have to say yes to it. That's why I have yes tattooed on my throat. We have to say yes to it. For people like us, the spiritual path is different. There's people who did not incarnate to be on this path of the observer. There are people who are here to be social justice warriors, to fight holy wars, to defend their personal good, true, and beautiful. But for people like us, we have to say yes to it. And when Joseph Campbell left, he found out that when his guru was his age, he was in the same situation and got to ask one question. And that was it. It's a rite of passage. This question, how can I say yes to God while saying no to this? You can't. You can't.
I love it. Do you ever fear death?
Not anymore, because when I feared death, I wanted to get high all the time, because death feels good. Birth hurts. Death feels good. And I didn't realize that like the desire to get high was the desire to die, to feel what it was like, even if it's just for a moment, to be like in my true nature without the body.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that that's what it was until I got heavily overdosed with nitrous when I tried it for the first time at the dentist. I was like, woo! It was like my first time going to like a legit dentist. You know, this guy fucked me up. Oh my God. I slipped out under the space time. I was with my friends that had died. Everything was legit. I was out. I was out. And when I came back, and one of the main things that I could feel was how unnatural calling somebody else wrong or pushing something away from me was to existence. I had the option to knock. I had literally like stopped breathing. People have this experience all the time when they have too much nitrous, but I had literally like stopped breathing. And I could see myself, the whole thing happened. And I realized then that like the desire to get high was the desire to die. And when I came back, like I could see that life was meant to be really painful. You know, that maybe I would lose my kids one day. I didn't have a vision of that happening, but maybe my life would be horribly painful. But I came here to experience life and not to experience death. But now I know what death is like. There was a few weeks after that experience where I was like smoking weed a lot. And, you know, it's before CPS I didn't take the hint then, you know, so I had to get a harder wake up call. Smoking weed in Texas is not okay. But I was like when I realized like, wow, like I'm stoked to die, because this is what death feels good. It feels so good. Like right when the drugs hit, like that's death. That is, it's the
return to the ether.
It feels good. It's nice. It's not scary. It's birth that's scary. Oh God, here we go again. You know,
the original trauma.
Yeah, it's so nice. So but it was never death that I was afraid of. It was being afraid of life with pain. Like I wasn't afraid of me dying. I was afraid of my kids dying and have to like live in the pain of not having them. You know, I was afraid of pain left and right. Even afraid that death was going to be pain. It's not the fear of death. It's like the fear of pain. And like, there's no escaping the pain of life. So now like, I say yes to it. Like I want it. It's okay with me. If it hurts, I'm okay with it. Whatever it is, I'll
embrace the suck, as they say in the military.
Yeah, but to say it and to like live it, it's been a really like, this is probably the biggest like.
Well, the difference is embrace the suck is almost always around like, okay, let's say you're in CrossFit, or you're doing a Spartan race or something. Embrace the suck is, I chose to do this thing. I signed up, I paid money, and now I'm doing it. And now I'm going to enjoy how much it hurts. I'm going to enjoy the suffering. I'm going to just get through it and take the whole experience, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. I think the hard part is when you didn't choose it and that bus comes careening into the side of you and you have the choice to just see it as this is just the dance of life. And like my grandfather died not long ago. And blessedly, I'm at a point now where, you know, I got to go and see his body in the hospital and have just the waves of emotion and to just be with them and cry and be angry and just feel all the feelings, but just have them. And then when I walked away, it was like it was all left in the room. As opposed to when my dad died, it was not that. There was a lot of clinging and pushing and, you know, resistance to the feelings because it's like, it's not fair. It's, you know, because I was in my 20s. It's just all these different things that I think it's very different when you choose the suffering. It's a lot easier to embrace it versus when you're, you know, hit from the side.
But how do you know you didn't choose it?
Well,
so you can't embrace the suck if you don't remember, I signed up for it, I paid money, this has my name on it.
Well, if you remember, if you believe, I chose this body, I chose this trip around the sun as a soul, right? If you believe in that, that gives you the ticket to say, I signed up for this shit, so I might as well experience it in full.
Buy the ticket, take the ride, as Hunter S. Thompson says.
That's
for
right.
For me, when my fiance died, the thing that I was clinging the most to, the thing that I wanted to happen the least, and it was absolutely necessary for my life. I understood it like in the moment, and then integrating it took some years, but I understood even if I didn't know how it worked. I understood that it had to happen, but it was only any time things are really not going my way, I have a piece of evidence from my life and even my childhood where it's like, I did not choose any of this that I could remember, but like, God must really love me because I would never pick these things out for myself consciously. No ways. But when they happened, I'm so grateful for every single one of these things that happened, and more so every single day. Like I can embrace the suck when I have my own data that like this has worked before.
We always get what we need. We rarely get what we want. It's like
on some level we chose it.
Yeah.
And within 2 or 3 years, we'll be grateful that things happen the way that they did. Working with the fourth way teacher I worked with was Biet Simkin. And one of the main reasons I was drawn to her was because her daughter died of SIDS and she was grateful. And when people tell their story without resentment, without like, this should not have happened, nothing is a neon flashing light that says teacher louder than that, than the gratitude. But I really like look for teachers like that have been through immense suffering. And I'm like, wouldn't you just hate God for that? Wouldn't you just be out, be like, that's it, we're not working together anymore?
Right.
The people that haven't, and Ram Dass's letter to those parents who lost their, did you ever read Ram Dass's letter? Oh man, you got to look it up. It was in his documentary, but like these parents in Washington State, their like 11-year-old daughter was like hard and murdered in a horrible way. And Ram Dass wrote them a letter. And man, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. But one of the best things that I've ever read. If when you put this podcast out, maybe you could link. I'll
link to
it. But transformational, and I feel like he really explained. That's like highest aspiration for me.
I was just going to say something, and then I realized I have to get on another call in like 10 minutes, and then we've been talking for an hour and a half.
Totally fine. I've had a great time being here. I wanted to just ask you one question quickly.
Of course.
Your spiritual awakening, you said you were talking about it earlier on, that you were like atheist, agnostic. You must have been asking a question somewhere.
No, I don't think so. And I only say that because I grew up in a way that was traumatizing, but it was mental torture, in that I was sort of caught between a fear that my father was going to kill himself, kill my mother, and then we were always physically unsafe as kids because the whoopings, if you will.
I understand.
So my whole life, I was never still. I didn't even think about death and what it actually was until I was 19 for the first time. I had an absolute full-blown panic attack, resealed that bitch in a vault, and didn't think about it again for another decade. And I lived, I was also very much an uppers kind of guy, although I also drank heavily and eventually quit January 2020. That was a blessing.
Good job.
In terms of timing. So it was only when I started doing sensory deprivation floats,
mm-hmm.
and I was doing them on a decent amount of marijuana,
mm-hmm.
which I think slowed me down so much, and there was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to escape. And that's when I started having these insights. And then, well, it wasn't even insights. It was healing. I was having a lot of somatic reactions, and I was getting out a lot of trauma. And that all started by reading Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul, which first helped me understand, I'm not this shell. I'm something that's observing things. And then getting in the tank, that allowed me to abstract away from it all. And then learning about trap trauma and that you can actually get it out. I would go in, I would find it, and I would get it all out. And then one day I was just in the tank after, I don't know, probably 45 minutes or so of all this. And I became so still, I stopped breathing. And I fell back into the light. And I had, whether it's samadhi or whatever the hell you want to call it, it was definitely a merging type of experience. The only thing that felt like that, not on psychedelics. And I came out of that, and that was just an absolutely life-changing moment, because it's like, what the fuck was that? And why is everyone not talking about it?
Yeah, for real.
And then you realize, for thousands of years, people talked about it all the time. That's what all the Gnostic writings and everything from basically up until Constantine took over, Christianity and made it into this patriarchal control mechanism. Everything was about spirituality in a way that put you in direct connection with God, as opposed to, you've got to go through these arbiters. So anyway, I don't think I had ever asked a question seriously. And maybe it was because I was afraid to have an answer, or I was afraid to look.
Would you not ask, what's the point of all this, or why am I here, or anything like that?
No, I was just maximum hedonism. It was just make as much money as I can. I'm in sales, and, my income was just going up, but my enjoyment of life was going down. I was,
maybe like, why am I not happy? Or
no, because
open the door. Like and I'm always interested, because when you have the question, like a question's objective. And so you can ask other people and like trigger the same like ding, but there's like that door doesn't open without a question. And I love finding out what the question is.
I don't know if I had a question, because my presumption, well, first of all, I was blind to the fact that I was on a runaway train to death. Like, the cocktail of things I was using to go up and down to, like, you know, stay in the ecstatic state and productive state throughout the day, whether it's, you know, from coffee to pre-workouts to Adderall to whatever, to, you know, heavy drinking and or marijuana to bring things down. The torque of that on my body was going to kill me in my 40s. I'm absolutely positive of it now. But if you were to have asked me in those times, like, are you unhappy? Are you, you know, going to die soon? It would have been absolutely in no way in my purview. It was just like, no, I haven't reached my goals yet. So I'm just on a tiptoe sprint, because I feel so not enough inside, because I was so very much convinced of that as a young child, that I was worthless, you know, that I'm on a mission to prove it. And from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, everything I did was in service to feeling validated in some way. So whether it was trying to get attention through my behavior or accolades, or achieving, you know, financial success or whatever, it was every single second of my life was crammed with doing. So there was a point where I had a coffee table. I had over 20 magazine subscriptions, and I would sit there with like multiple of them open, with a laptop open, with a TV on, with a phone by my side.
My life. Yeah.
It's just like, I'll just consume it all. I'll get there. And any time that I wasn't doing that, it was like a vibration that was terrorizing, that like, you're not doing enough.
If I didn't have that, it's like suicide becomes the number one thing on my mind. And stillness, like I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Busy every moment of every day.
Yeah. And what's ironic is I never contemplated suicide to escape. It was just, for some reason, someone in my life early on must have made me feel like I could do it, whatever it is. And so it was just like, well, I just haven't worked hard enough yet, or I haven't, you know, met the right person or team or whatever. So and because of the things that I was objectively measuring, money, you know, whether it's meeting famous people or, you know, flying first class or staying in 5-star hotels or whatever the things are that success looks like, I was getting more of those things over time. So obviously I was doing it right. Meanwhile, I was spiritually bankrupt. I couldn't have any level of true intimacy with anybody, because there was a fucking vault around my heart, and all my chakras really, but my heart for sure. And it only got thicker every year, because in order to do all those things, I was sacrificing all of my actual self-worth and spirituality at the altar of that. And that's probably what drives a lot of my paranoia around want, because I saw what happened to me in the past.
I understand.
Which makes it like, of course, that's my path then.
Of course. Okay, can I give you a piece of homework? It'll be very short.
Of course, by all means.
All right, the next time you find yourself hungry, I want you to really think about, like, top of the food chain, if I could have anything to eat, like what would it be? And go and get it. And when you're eating it, close your eyes, close your ears, and everything, the temperature of it, the sound of it in your mouth, the textures, everything, as a meditation, go completely into that. That's the point of life. And Zen is a really nice like lineage for the beauty of the of what is. And my brother recommended me a book called The Joy of Living by Thich Nhat Hanh, I think it is, but I haven't read it yet. But from what he was telling me about it, it sounded
I think I have
like
that queued on Audible, actually.
a similar thing. Yeah, he said it's awesome. And then if you have an experience with the fruit like that, or whatever it is that feels so good to you to eat, of just being completely present with it to the point where you're not where you enter like the stretch of the eternal moment where it's just like, am I still on this bite kind
You're
of
here
thing?
now.
That's the point of this life. When you've done all the spiritual work, when you've done all the reading and everything, like what's the point of it all, is to completely enjoy this human body, because it is such a gift. And if you have a transcendental experience with that, don't have sex until you're like, wow, I woke up this morning wanting it. It's probably not going to happen for me and let the want be as big as possible. Once the orbit of desire comes around, it's going to be there. As long as you don't like ejaculate, it'll stay there until it's go time. But the next time you have an opportunity to have sex, that same total focus on just what is being experienced in the body at that moment, that's the point of this life, when all the work has been done, to just enjoy it. Delight is in the heart of the Almighty.
Mami Onami, I got to say, I can't think of a better way to have ended this conversation. You're an absolute treat.
Thank you.
Bless
I
your
had
heart and
such
soul.
a great time on this podcast. You ask wonderful questions. You've been an amazing experience for me. Thank you so much for having me. I hope to see you again.
Same.
Love to all of your beautiful family. And thank you for having me.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye. Please send me this so I can send it to my audience.
I will. You bet. Cheers.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.